Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. God bless you all, and let's dive straight into today's story. If you think the story is good, then give it a like. If not, don't. I will never beg for likes or comments. Real love speaks for itself. The rain had been relentless for 3 days, turning London's streets into glistening mirrors that reflected the city lights in fractured, watery patterns. For Lyra Thornberry, the weather matched her mood perfectly. A seemingly endless downpour with no relief in sight. Her fingers trembled slightly as she arranged the last of the leather-bound classics in the small, cramped bookshop where she worked 5 evenings a week after her day job at the cafe. "You should head home soon, dear," Mrs. Pembroke, the elderly shop owner, called from behind the counter. "That storm's only getting worse." Lyra glanced at the antique clock on the wall. 8:42 p.m., 18 minutes until closing. 18 minutes until she could rush to the hospital to check on Grandma Cordelia before visiting hours ended at 10. "I'll just finish this section," she replied, her melodic voice carrying a hint of the exhaustion she fought daily. The bell above the door jingled, and both women turned, surprised that anyone would venture out in such weather. A tall figure stood in the doorway, water streaming from an expensive wool coat that did little to hide the elegant suit beneath. The man shook his head slightly, droplets of water flying from his dark copper hair. Mrs. Pembroke straightened immediately, sensing wealth and importance. "Good evening, sir. Dreadful night to be out. How may we help you?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he took 2 unsteady steps forward, one hand rising to loosen his tie as if it were suddenly strangling him. Something in his movement caught Lyra's attention, a lurching quality that seemed wrong. "Sir?" she called, taking a step toward him. His eyes met hers across the room, startlingly blue against his flushed face. And in that moment, Lyra saw raw panic in them. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, a harsh, wheezing gasp escaped. Then, as if his strings had been cut, he collapsed to the floor. "Oh my God!" Mrs. Pembroke cried, frozen behind the counter. Lyra dropped the book she was holding and rushed to the man's side. His face was turning an alarming shade of red, blotchy hives appearing at his jawline. His breathing came in desperate, strained wheezes. "Call an ambulance!" Lyra shouted to Mrs. Pembroke, who fumbled for the phone. Kneeling beside him, Lyra loosened his tie completely and unbuttoned his shirt collar. "Sir, can you hear me? Are you allergic to anything?" The man's eyes locked onto hers again, wide with fear. He managed a single word: shellfish. Lyra's mind raced back to her 6 months volunteering at Royal London Hospital. "Anaphylaxis," she muttered. "Do you have an EpiPen?" He shook his head weakly, his lips taking on a bluish tinge. "Mrs. Pembroke, how far out is the ambulance?" Lyra called, her hands moving to check his pulse, rapid and weakening. "At least 15 minutes with the flooding on Oxford Street." 15 minutes, too long. Lyra made a split-second decision. "I need your help. We have to elevate his legs." Together, they managed to prop his long legs up on a stack of books. Lyra positioned his head to maintain his airway, her hand gentle but firm beneath his neck. His skin burned with fever against her palm. "Stay with me," she urged, leaning close enough that she could feel his labored breath against her cheek. "Help is coming, but you need to fight." The man's eyes never left her face, as if she were an anchor in a storm. Something about that desperate gaze stirred something in Lyra, a connection that seemed to transcend their circumstances. "My name is Lyra," she said softly, instinctively knowing that keeping him conscious was crucial. "Can you tell me yours?" His lips moved, but the sound was barely audible. She leaned closer, her ear nearly touching his mouth. "Benedict," he whispered, the effort clearly costing him. Benedict, she repeated, the name feeling strangely right on her lips. You're going to be all right, Benedict, I promise. His hand found hers, gripping with surprising strength given his condition. For a moment, despite the dire situation, a current seemed to pass between them, something electric and undeniable. Lyra told herself it was merely the heightened emotion of the moment, yet she couldn't tear her gaze from his. The next minutes passed in a blur of tension. Lyra kept talking to him, her voice low and soothing, telling him about the book she'd been shelving, about the coming spring, about anything that might keep him tethered to consciousness. All the while, her fingers remained entwined with his, her other hand monitoring the pulse at his neck. When his breathing seemed to worsen, she shifted to support him in a semi-upright position, cradling his upper body against her chest. His head rested against her shoulder, his hair, damp from the rain, carrying the scent of expensive cologne. Despite his condition, Lyra couldn't help noticing his striking features, the strong jawline now marred by angry hives, the elegant nose, the well-formed lips struggling for air. The ambulance should be here any minute, she murmured, feeling his body tremble against hers. Just hold on a little longer. His eyes fluttered, beginning to close. No. Stay with me, Benedict, she urged more forcefully, squeezing his hand. Look at me. With visible effort, he forced his eyes open again, focusing on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. In that moment of connection, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that seemed impossible between strangers. The wail of sirens finally broke the tension. Mrs. Pembroke rushed to open the door as paramedics burst in with equipment and a stretcher. They moved efficiently, taking over from Lyra, asking rapid questions about what had happened. Suspected shellfish anaphylaxis, she reported, reluctantly releasing Benedict's hand as they transferred him to the stretcher. Onset approximately 12 minutes ago, no EpiPen available. One of the paramedics gave her an approving glance. You've done well keeping his airway open. Are you a medical professional? Just a former hospital volunteer, she replied, watching, as they administered epinephrine and attached an oxygen mask. As they prepared to wheel him out, Benedict's eyes sought hers one final time. Through the oxygen mask, his lips moved, forming what looked like, "Thank you." Lyra managed a reassuring smile, though her heart was racing with an emotion she couldn't name. The bell jingled again as the door closed behind them, leaving the bookshop in sudden, heavy silence. "Well," Mrs. Pembroke exclaimed, visibly shaken, "I believe you've just saved that gentleman's life, Lyra." Lyra stared at her hands, still feeling the ghost of his touch. "I just hope he'll be all right." "I'm sure he will, thanks to you." The older woman patted her shoulder. "You should go home now, dear. It's been quite an evening." Lyra nodded absently, gathering her things in a daze. As she pulled on her worn coat, her thoughts remained with the mysterious Benedict. Something about those intense blue eyes, the connection she'd felt while holding him. It had stirred her in a way she couldn't explain. "Don't be ridiculous," she chided herself. "He was a man in distress, and you helped him, that's all." Yet as she stepped out into the rain, umbrella raised against the downpour, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, that her life had somehow shifted on its axis during those few charged minutes. At the end of the street, an ambulance pulled away, lights flashing against the rain-slicked pavement. Lyra watched until it disappeared around a corner, carrying with it a stranger who, against all reason, no longer felt like a stranger at all. Turning toward the underground station, she hurried her steps. Grandma Cordelia would be waiting for her visit, and Lyra was already late. She pushed thoughts of Benedict from her mind, telling herself she would likely never see him again. How wrong she was. Chapter 2. Fated Hearts. Benedict Fairchild stood at the window of his Belgravia penthouse, watching raindrops race down the glass. 3 weeks had passed since his near-fatal allergic reaction, yet he couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had saved his life. Lyra. Even her name felt like poetry on his tongue. "You're obsessing," his friend and physician, Dr. Atticus Montgomery, remarked from behind him. The hospital staff checked. She didn't leave any contact information. "She was real, wasn't she?" Benedict asked, not turning around. "Sometimes I wonder if I hallucinated her because of the anaphylaxis." Atticus sighed. "She was real. The paramedics confirmed a bookshop employee provided initial treatment. But London has millions of people, Benedict. Finding one woman with only a first name. I'd know her anywhere," Benedict interrupted, finally turning to face his friend. Dark circles beneath his eyes revealed nights of restless sleep. Her voice, her eyes. There was something about her, Atticus. Something I can't explain. "You were oxygen deprived and in shock," Atticus said gently. "It's not uncommon to form intense attachments to caregivers in life-threatening situations." Benedict shook his head. "This is different. When she held my hand..." He trailed off, unable to articulate the connection he'd felt. A recognition that defied logic. Atticus studied his friend carefully. In 15 years of friendship, he'd never seen Benedict so affected by anyone. Since his illness and the subsequent abandonment by his fiancée Victoria, Benedict had maintained careful emotional distance from everyone. "Very well," Atticus conceded. "Where was this bookshop?" "Near Bloomsbury. Mrs. Pembroke's literary treasures." "Then start there," Atticus suggested. "But Benedict, manage your expectations. Even if you find her..." "I know," Benedict cut him off. "I just need to thank her properly." They both knew it was more than gratitude driving him. Saturday morning found Lyra in St. James's Park, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. Despite the light drizzle, she'd escaped to her favorite bench, desperate for a few hours of solitude and creative expression. Her grandmother was having a good day, watched over by Mrs. Winters, their elderly neighbor, giving Lyra a rare moment of freedom. Her charcoal pencil moved across the paper, capturing the misty outline of the palace in the distance. Art had always been her refuge, her dream. Until life had demanded she set it aside for more practical pursuits. These stolen moments were all she had left of that dream. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the approaching figure until a shadow fell across her sketch. Looking up, she froze, her pencil suspended mid-stroke. Benedict Fairchild stood before her, tall and imposing in a charcoal wool coat, holding an umbrella that he immediately positioned to shield her from the increasing rainfall. "It is you," he said, his voice deep and cultured, a hint of wonder in his tone. Lyra stared, unable to process his sudden appearance. He looked remarkably different from the dying man she'd cradled in the bookshop. Strong, vital, aristocratic in his bearing. Only his eyes remained the same, that intense blue that had haunted her dreams for weeks. "How did you find me?" she finally managed, closing her sketchbook protectively. "I've been looking everywhere," he admitted. "Mrs. Pembroke told me you sometimes sketch here on weekends." Lyra felt a flutter of unease mixed with something else. Something warmer and more dangerous. "You've gone to considerable trouble for a simple thank you." His lips curved slightly. "Is that what you think this is?" The rain intensified, droplets drumming against his umbrella. Without asking permission, Benedict settled beside her on the bench, careful to keep the umbrella positioned over them both. Their shoulders nearly touched, and Lyra was acutely aware of his proximity. "You saved my life," he continued, his gaze never leaving her face. "I wanted to express my gratitude, but..." He paused. I also wanted to see if what I felt was real or merely a product of my condition. Lyra's heart quickened. "And what did you feel, Mr. Fairchild?" "Benedict," he corrected, "I felt as though I'd known you before, as if in that moment, holding your hand was the most natural thing in the world." The directness of his statement should have made her retreat. Instead, Lyra found herself drawn to his honesty. "That's quite a dramatic interpretation," she said, trying to sound practical despite the traitorous racing of her pulse. "I'm not typically given to dramatics," he responded with a slight smile. "May I see your sketches?" The request was unexpected. Lyra hesitated, then slowly opened her sketchbook. Benedict studied her work with genuine interest, his expression revealing appreciation rather than polite curiosity. "These are extraordinary," he said finally. "You've captured something beyond the physical landscape. There's emotion in these lines." His observation, so perceptive, caught her off guard. "I studied art briefly at university before I had to withdraw." "Why did you withdraw?" he asked. The question touched on wounds still raw. "Life intervened," she answered simply. "My grandmother needed care after her first stroke, and there were financial considerations." Benedict nodded, not pressing for details she clearly didn't wish to share. "Do you know Tennyson?" he asked, instead changing the subject. "In Memoriam was my father's favorite," she replied, surprised by the shift. Benedict looked pleased. "'Tis better to have loved and lost, than never to have loved at all," he quoted, "though I've always preferred Ulysses myself. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." "A fitting personal motto for a man who appears to get what he wants," Lyra observed, a touch of defiance in her tone. His eyes darkened slightly. "Not always," he said softly. The rain increased to a downpour, water falling in sheets around their small sanctuary beneath the umbrella. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "We should find better shelter," Benedict suggested, offering his hand to help her up. Lyra hesitated only briefly before accepting it. The contact sent the same inexplicable current through her that she'd felt in the bookshop. From Benedict's slight intake of breath, she knew he felt it too. They hurried through the park, Benedict matching his stride to hers, the umbrella held carefully to protect her sketchbook. As the storm intensified, they made a mutual wordless decision to seek refuge in Westminster Abbey, its ancient stones offering sanctuary as they had for centuries. Inside, the cathedral was dimly lit and nearly empty, most tourists having fled the inclement weather. Their footsteps echoed on the stone floor as Benedict guided her toward a quiet corner near a stained glass window depicting the sacrifice of Christ. "Better?" he asked, shaking droplets from the umbrella. Lyra nodded, suddenly aware of how alone they were in the vastness of the cathedral. She moved toward the window, ostensibly to admire the craftsmanship, but also to put some distance between them. Benedict followed, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and bergamot. "Why did you really look for me?" she asked, keeping her eyes on the colored glass. "Because I haven't slept properly since that night," he answered, his honesty disarming. "Because when I close my eyes, I see your face. Because something happened between us, Lyra, and I needed to know if it was real." She turned to face him then, her heart pounding. "And is it real?" Benedict stepped closer, closing the space between them. "You feel it too," he said, not a question, but a statement. Before Lyra could respond, his hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch gentle but sure. Time seemed to suspend as he leaned down, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Lyra remained motionless, drawn by a force she couldn't name. His lips met hers with unexpected tenderness, a kiss that began as a whisper but quickly deepened as Lyra responded. Her sketchbook fell forgotten to the floor as her hands found his shoulders, steadying herself against the rush of sensation. Benedict's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer until she was pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. The kiss transformed, passion replacing gentleness as years of loneliness and restraint gave way to raw need. Lyra's back met the cool stone column beside the window, Benedict's body shielding her from view as his hands tangled in her hair. Lightning flashed through the stained glass, casting prismatic colors across their entwined figures. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Benedict rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "Tell me you felt nothing," he whispered, "and I'll walk away." Before Lyra could answer, her phone rang shrilly in her pocket. Reluctantly pulling away, she answered to hear Mrs. Winters's panicked voice. "It's your grandmother," the elderly woman said. "She's taken a turn. The ambulance is already here." Lyra's world tilted. "I'm coming now," she said, ending the call with shaking fingers. "What is it?" Benedict asked, concern replacing desire in his eyes. "My grandmother," Lyra explained, already gathering her fallen sketchbook. "I have to go." Benedict nodded immediately. "My car is nearby. Let me take you." She started to refuse, but practicality won out. "Thank you." Outside, the rain continued unabated. Benedict guided her to a sleek black Bentley parked nearby, opening the door for her before sliding in beside her. As he gave the driver instructions, his hand found hers, offering silent support. In the intimacy of the back seat, surrounded by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the windows, Lyra found herself drawing strength from his presence. Whatever had begun between them, impossible, impractical, inexplicable as it was, she could no longer deny its reality. Whether blessing or curse remained to be seen. Chapter 3. Dark Revelations. The fluorescent lights of London Royal Hospital cast harsh shadows across Lyra's face as she sat beside her grandmother's bed, counting the steady beeps of the heart monitor. 3 days had passed since Cordelia's collapse. 3 days of tests and worried consultations with doctors who spoke in careful, measured tones. Lyra's hand rested gently on her grandmother's frail one, mindful of the IV line. Cordelia Thornbury had always been a force of nature, the woman who had raised Lyra after her parents' fatal car accident, who had worked 2 jobs to keep their small home, who had encouraged Lyra's artistic talents even when practicality suggested otherwise. Seeing her reduced to this fragile figure in the hospital bed was almost unbearable. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Turning, she was surprised to see Benedict standing in the doorway, a modest bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. In the 72 hours since he had rushed her to the hospital, he had been an unexpected constant, arranging for specialists to consult on Cordelia's case, ensuring Lyra ate something between vigils, quietly handling details she was too exhausted to consider. "How is she today?" he asked, his voice low as he placed the flowers on the windowsill. "Stable," Lyra answered, the word holding both relief and uncertainty. "They're saying the medication is helping, but it's too soon to know if there's been permanent damage from the stroke." Benedict nodded, pulling a chair beside hers. Dr. Montgomery reviewed her latest scans. He's cautiously optimistic. Lyra glanced at him, a question in her eyes. "Atticus, Dr. Montgomery is a friend," Benedict explained. "One of the few people I trust implicitly." His hand found hers, enclosing it in gentle warmth. The intimate gesture felt both new and familiar, as if their hands had always been meant to find each other. In the quiet of the hospital room, with the rhythmic beeping of monitors as background, Lyra allowed herself to draw strength from his touch. "You don't have to keep coming," she said softly, though her fingers tightened around his. "You've done more than enough already." "Do you want me to leave?" he asked directly. Lyra hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she admitted. "But I don't understand why you're here. You barely know us." Benedict's gaze settled on their joined hands. "I know enough," he said simply. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by Cordelia's steady breathing and the clinical sounds of the hospital. Eventually, a nurse entered to check vitals, informing Lyra that her grandmother would likely sleep through the night. "You should rest," Benedict suggested gently. "You've barely left this room for 3 days." Lyra knew he was right. Exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight, making her thoughts sluggish and her body ache. Still, she hesitated. "I can have someone call you immediately if there's any change," the nurse assured her. Finally nodding, Lyra leaned over to kiss her grandmother's forehead. "I'll be back first thing tomorrow," she promised. Outside, the hospital corridors were quiet. The late hour having diminished the usual bustle, Benedict guided her with a light hand at her back, his presence somehow making the sterile hallways less intimidating. "My driver can take you home," he offered. As they approached the exit, Lyra stopped, suddenly realizing she hadn't been home in days. The thought of returning to her empty flat, with its reminders of Cordelia's absence, filled her with unexpected dread. Benedict seemed to read her hesitation. "Or you could come to my place," he suggested carefully. "I have plenty of guest rooms. You could shower, have a proper meal, sleep in a real bed instead of that hospital chair." She should refuse. Every instinct for self-preservation urged caution. Yet the thought of facing the empty flat, of being alone with her fears for Cordelia, was more daunting than accepting his offer. "All right," she agreed, surprising them both. "Thank you." The drive to Benedict's Belgravia townhouse passed in silence, Lyra too exhausted to maintain conversation. When they arrived, the grandeur of the building with its white facade and elegant columns barely registered through her fatigue. Inside, however, the warm lighting and understated luxury of his home penetrated her exhaustion. Original artwork graced the walls, and comfortable furniture invited relaxation rather than formal admiration. It was the home of someone with not just wealth, but taste and confidence. "Let me show you to a guest room," Benedict offered, leading her up a curved staircase. The room he provided was elegant yet inviting, decorated in soothing blues and creams. An adjoining bathroom featured a massive soaking tub that made Lyra's aching muscles yearn for immersion. "There are fresh towels in the bathroom," Benedict told her. "I'll have Anna, my housekeeper, leave some clean clothes outside your door. They'll be a bit large, but more comfortable than sleeping in what you've been wearing for days." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Lyra deeply. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. Benedict hesitated at the door. "Try to rest. We can talk in the morning." After he left, Lyra filled the luxurious tub with steaming water and lowered herself into it with a sigh that was almost a sob. The events of the past days, meeting Benedict, Cordelia's stroke, the upheaval of emotions, seemed to dissolve in the warm water, along with the hospital's antiseptic smell. By the time she emerged, wrapped in a plush towel, she found clean, silk pajamas outside the door as promised. Exhaustion claimed her almost the moment her head touched the pillow, pulling her into deep, dreamless sleep. Hours later, she woke disoriented, screaming her grandmother's name into the darkness. Within moments, the door opened and Benedict appeared, wearing only pajama bottoms, his bare chest pale in the dim light. Without hesitation, he crossed to the bed and sat beside her, gathering her trembling form against his chest. It was just a dream, he murmured into her hair. Cordelia is stable. You'd have been called if anything changed. Lyra clung to him, reality slowly reasserting itself. I dreamed she was gone, that I was completely alone, she whispered against his skin. You're not alone, Benedict assured her, his voice a rumble she could feel through his chest. Later, she would blame exhaustion and emotional vulnerability for what happened next. Looking up at him, her face still damp with tears, something shifted between them. Comfort transforming into awareness, solace into desire. Benedict must have felt it too, for his breathing changed, becoming more measured. His hand, which had been stroking her hair soothingly, stilled. Lyra, he whispered, her name a question and a warning. She answered by rising up to press her lips to his, a kiss born of need and gratitude that quickly became something else, entirely. Benedict responded with restrained passion, allowing her to set the pace, his hands gentle but insistent as they cradled her face. When she pulled him down beside her on the bed, he went willingly, his body a welcome weight and warmth. Above her, their kisses deepened, grew hungrier as hands explored with increasing urgency. The silk of her borrowed pajamas whispered between them, a barrier too easily removed. In the silvery darkness, they discovered each other slowly at first. Then, with mounting passion, Benedict's lips traced a path along her throat, her collarbone, lower still, drawing soft gasps from Lyra that turned to moans as he discovered particularly sensitive places. Her hands learned the contours of his body, the broad shoulders, the surprisingly defined muscles beneath smooth skin, the raised scar along his lower abdomen that made her wonder but not ask. When they finally joined, the connection was more than physical, a recognition, a homecoming neither had expected to find. They moved together with increasing urgency, whispered words giving way to breathless cries as pleasure built and crested between them. Afterward, lying in the tangled sheets with Lyra's head pillowed on his chest, Benedict broke the comfortable silence. I barely know you, he said, echoing her earlier words, yet I feel I've waited for you my entire life. Lyra traced idle patterns on his skin, considering his words. This is madness, she replied softly. We come from different worlds. This can't possibly work. Benedict's hand caught hers, stilling her movements. Don't decide that yet, he urged. Give us a chance to discover what this could be. The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. This man, who clearly had everything, was asking for a chance as if he expected rejection. It made her wonder what experiences had shaped him. Tell me something real about yourself, she requested, shifting to look into his eyes. Something you don't tell everyone. Benedict was quiet for so long that Lyra thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice held a carefully controlled pain. I can't father children, he said simply, the words falling between them like stones. A high fever from a severe infection when I was 28 damaged my reproductive system irreparably. The confession, so personal and clearly painful, touched Lyra deeply. I'm sorry, she said sincerely. My fiancée at the time, Victoria, was not, he continued, his tone neutral in a way that suggested practiced control. She left within a month of the diagnosis, said she couldn't imagine a life without children, that it was cruel to ask her to stay. Lyra propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light. That must have been devastating. It was a clarifying experience, he replied with a hint of bitterness. It taught me what people truly value. Since then, I've been careful about attachments. The admission explained much about him. The initial intensity of his pursuit, followed by the careful restraint he'd shown until tonight. He had been testing her, she realized, waiting for her to demonstrate the same conditional acceptance Victoria had offered. Now you, Benedict prompted gently. Tell me something real about Lyra Thornberry. She could have shared something inconsequential, but his honesty demanded reciprocity. My parents died when I was 11, she began, the familiar ache of the memory present but dulled by time. Drunk driver hit them head-on one night. Grandma Cordelia took me in, though she was already in her 60s and living on a modest pension. Benedict's hand stroked soothingly along her bare back, encouraging her to continue. She sold her home to pay for my university tuition, Lyra continued, the weight of old guilt heavy in her voice. I had a scholarship to the Royal College of Art, but it only covered partial fees. 3 months into my first term, she had her first stroke. The money from selling her house went to her care instead, and I withdrew to look after her. You've never resented her for it? Benedict asked. How could I? Lyra replied. She sacrificed everything for me after my parents died. It was my turn to sacrifice for her. They were quiet for a moment, absorbing each other's revelations, the intimacy of shared secrets somehow deeper than the physical closeness they had just experienced. What happens now? Lyra asked eventually, reality beginning to intrude on their bubble of intimacy. Benedict's arms tightened around her. Now you sleep, he said pragmatically. In the morning we'll check on Cordelia, and then we'll see where this leads us. It wasn't a declaration or a promise, but somehow it was enough. Wrapped in his warmth, with the burden of fear and loneliness temporarily lifted from her shoulders, Lyra allowed herself to drift back to sleep. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Chapter 4. Thorns Among Roses. Benedict invited Lyra to Thornfield Manor, his ancestral estate in the Cotswolds, for a weekend gathering. The invitation came as they sat in Cordelia's small flat, Benedict reading Tennyson aloud while Lyra sketched. It's just a small gathering, he explained. A few friends, some family. The gardens are in full bloom. Lyra looked up, uncertainty in her eyes. Their relationship had deepened since that night in his townhouse, but they had carefully maintained separation between their worlds. I'm not sure I would fit in, she said carefully. That's precisely why I want you there, Benedict replied. I'm tired of people who fit in perfectly but have nothing genuine to offer. When they arrived at Thornfield Manor, Lyra was awestruck by the honey-colored stone mansion rising from meticulously maintained gardens. Inside, Benedict showed her to a beautiful bedroom decorated in soft greens and creams. I have something to show you, he said, taking her hand. He led her to the 3rd floor, where he opened a door to reveal a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows. Light flooded the space, illuminating an artist's studio with easels, canvases, and supplies of the highest quality. This was my mother's studio, Benedict explained. I thought you might use it during your stay. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Lyra reached up to kiss him. What began as gratitude quickly deepened as Benedict's arms encircled her waist. He backed her gently against a wall, his body pressing against hers in a way that sent fire through her veins. We should stop, he murmured against her neck. Guests will be arriving soon. Lyra agreed, even as her hands slipped beneath his sweater. Benedict groaned, capturing her mouth again. Tonight, he whispered against her lips, after dinner. That evening, Lyra entered the drawing room wearing a simple but elegant midnight blue dress. Benedict crossed immediately to her side, his appreciation evident in his gaze. Most guests were welcoming if reserved, but the atmosphere shifted when a striking blonde woman entered. Lady Imogen Whitley, the butler announced. The woman swept into the room like she owned it, approaching them with a predatory smile. Benedict, darling, she purred. How remiss of you not to tell me you had a new friend. Throughout dinner in the formal dining room, Lyra felt Imogen's calculating gaze. The other woman had positioned herself directly across from them. Tell me, Lyra, Imogen said during the main course, how did you and Benedict meet? We met at a bookshop, Lyra said simply. A bookshop? Imogen exclaimed. How quaint. Though I imagined it must have been somewhere special, given Benedict's usual social circles. Second cousins, once removed, Benedict clarified when Imogen claimed their families had been connected for generations. And I believe the last time our families were truly connected was when your great-grandfather tried to sell mine a false Rembrandt? Imogen's smile tightened. Ancient history. Though speaking of history, Lyra must find all this quite overwhelming. Such a different world from Brixton, isn't it? The targeted reference to Lyra's neighborhood created a palpable tension. I find Thornfield Manor beautiful and welcoming, Lyra replied steadily, much like its owner. How loyal, Imogen observed, though one wonders if you've discussed all the responsibilities that come with someone in Benedict's position, the expectations. Her gaze flickered meaningfully to Lyra's stomach. The necessities of continuing certain legacies. The implication was unmistakable. Benedict's jaw clenched, but Lyra spoke first. Some legacies are worth more than bloodlines, Lady Whitley, she said quietly. Kindness, for instance, integrity, qualities that seem to transcend generations in some families, while sadly disappearing from others. After dinner, on her way to check on Cordelia, Lyra overheard Imogen speaking to another guest. She won't last a month, Imogen was saying. Benedict's slumming, that's all. He'll tire of her exotic appeal once reality sets in. She seems genuinely nice, the other woman protested. Nice doesn't matter, Imogen dismissed. She has nothing to offer him. No connections, no proper background, and eventually she'll want children. What then? We all know Benedict can't provide that particular necessity. By the time Benedict found her an hour later, Lyra had packed her bag. What are you doing? He asked, confusion evident. I think it's best if Grandma Cordelia and I return to London, Lyra said without looking at him. Benedict crossed the room and gently took the blouse from her hands. Why? Because I don't belong here, she answered, honestly. Your cousin made that abundantly clear, and she's right. This isn't my world. The only difference that matters is that you're kind and genuine, and most of the people I've known my entire life are neither, Benedict countered. Don't let Imogen's jealousy drive you away. It's not just Imogen, Lyra insisted. It's everything. The way people looked at me at dinner, the assumptions they made. Since when do you care what people think? Benedict challenged. Since it started to affect you, Lyra burst out. You deserve someone who fits into your life seamlessly, who can give you... She broke off abruptly. Benedict's expression softened. Someone who can give me children. Is that what this is about? Lyra looked away. I heard what Imogen said about your condition, that it's why your previous relationships ended. Nothing, no estate, no legacy, no family name, matters more to me than how I feel when I'm with you, he said fiercely. For the first time in years, I feel alive, Lyra. You did that. Instead of responding with words, Lyra reached for him. Their lips met in a kiss that expressed all the emotions words couldn't convey: fear, desire, vulnerability, hope. Benedict lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed, their bodies speaking what their hearts already knew. In the candle-lit darkness of the bedroom, he worshipped every inch of her body, whispering promises against her skin. Their passion built slowly, intensely, until they moved together in perfect harmony, their cries of pleasure echoing in the ancient room. Afterward, tangled in silk sheets, Benedict held her close. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just tonight, but in my life. Give us a chance." Looking up at him, seeing the vulnerability and hope in his eyes, Lyra made her decision. She would not let fear or Imogen's cruelty deny her this chance at happiness. "I'll stay," she promised, sealing her words with a kiss that soon rekindled their passion, their bodies joining again and again until dawn began to lighten the sky. Chapter 5. Grandmother's Blessing. A month after the Thornfield Manor weekend, Lyra woke to the sound of her mobile phone ringing in the darkness. Beside her, Benedict stirred but didn't wake. They had fallen asleep after making love, his arms still draped, protectively across her waist. "Hello?" she whispered, slipping from beneath his embrace and padding into the hallway of her small flat. "Lyra, it's Mrs. Winters from next door," came the elderly voice, tight with worry. "It's your grandmother. I heard a crash and found her on the bathroom floor. The ambulance is coming, but you should meet us at London Royal." Ice flooded Lyra's veins. "I'm on my way." When she returned to the bedroom, Benedict was already sitting up, instantly alert at the expression on her face. "Cordelia," she managed, hands shaking as she searched for clothes. "She's collapsed again." Without a word, Benedict rose and dressed quickly, making calls while Lyra gathered her things. By the time they reached his waiting car, he had arranged for Dr. Montgomery to meet them at the hospital. The emergency room was chaotic, but Benedict's presence parted the crowd like magic. Within minutes, they found Mrs. Winters in a waiting area, her lined face creased with concern. "She was conscious when they took her," the older woman reported. "Kept saying she was fine, just dizzy, but her speech was slurred, love." Dr. Montgomery found them soon after, his expression grave. "It's another stroke," he confirmed. "More severe than the last. We need to act quickly." Over the next 48 hours, Lyra barely left the hospital. Benedict remained a constant presence, handling details she couldn't process, arranging for specialists, ensuring the best care, even making sure she ate and occasionally rested in the private room he'd somehow secured. On the third night, as Lyra dozed in a chair by Cordelia's bed, she woke to the sound of her grandmother's voice. "He loves you very much, doesn't he?" Lyra straightened immediately, relief washing through her at the clarity in Cordelia's eyes. "Grandma, you're awake. How do you feel?" "Don't change the subject," Cordelia chided weakly. "That man hasn't left this hospital since they brought me in. Even when you're asleep, he sits in the corridor, making calls or reading." Looking toward the door, Lyra could see Benedict through the small window, his tall frame somehow folded into an uncomfortable chair, head bent over a book. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I believe he does." Cordelia studied her granddaughter's face. "And you? Do you love him?" "I do," Lyra whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. "But it's complicated, Grandma. His world is so different from ours." "Nonsense," Cordelia said with surprising strength. "Love isn't complicated. People make it so." She reached for Lyra's hand. "Your parents had nothing when they married. Your father was a gardener's son, your mother from a good Cambridge family. Her parents disowned her, you know." Lyra stared at her grandmother. "I didn't know that. They came around eventually when your mother refused to regret her choice," Cordelia continued. "They realized that happiness matters more than matching backgrounds." She paused, gathering strength. "Bring him in here." When Benedict entered, Cordelia gestured for him to sit beside Lyra. "Young man," she began, her voice steady despite her weakened state, "I understand you're quite wealthy." Benedict looked startled but answered honestly, "Yes, Mrs. Thornbury. And titled, I suppose?" "A baronetcy," he admitted. "Nothing particularly impressive." Cordelia snorted. "Rich and modest. Interesting combination." Her gaze turned shrewd. "Do you love my granddaughter?" Benedict didn't hesitate. "More than I thought possible." Cordelia murmured. "And what do you intend to do about it?" "Grandma," Lyra protested, "this isn't appropriate." "I'm old and ill," Cordelia retorted. "Appropriate is a luxury I can no longer afford." She fixed Benedict with a penetrating stare. "Well, I intend to spend my life making her happy," Benedict answered simply. "If she'll allow it." Cordelia studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Help me sit up, Lyra," she instructed. Once upright, Cordelia slowly worked a gold ring from her finger, a simple band with a small but perfect emerald. "This was your mother's," she told Lyra, "and her mother's before that. The emerald came from Jamaica, brought by your great-great-grandfather when he immigrated to England." She pressed the ring into Benedict's palm, closing his fingers around it. "A family should have traditions," she said meaningfully, "even new ones." Benedict's throat worked visibly as he accepted the token. "I'll treasure it," he promised. "See that you do," Cordelia replied. "Now, both of you go home and get proper rest. I'm not going anywhere tonight." Outside Cordelia's room, Lyra turned to Benedict, emotion making her voice unsteady. "You don't have to." He silenced her with a gentle finger against her lips. "I know," he said softly, "but I want to. Not yet, perhaps, but when you're ready." That night, in Lyra's tiny flat with its mismatched furniture and faded wallpaper, Benedict made love to her with a new tenderness. Each touch, each kiss seemed infused with deeper meaning after Cordelia's unexpected blessing. "I was so afraid of losing her," Lyra whispered in the darkness, her body still trembling from their lovemaking. "She's all the family I have left." Benedict gathered her closer, his skin warm against hers. "Not anymore," he murmured into her hair. "You have me now, if you want me." In response, Lyra rose above him, the amber light from the street lamp outside casting her beautiful body in gold. Benedict's breath caught as she lowered herself onto him again, their bodies joining in the most primal expression of connection. This time, their lovemaking was slower, more deliberate, each movement a promise, each sigh a vow. As pleasure built between them, Lyra gazed into Benedict's eyes, allowing herself to believe in the possibility of their future together. When release finally claimed them both, it felt like a beginning rather than an end. Later, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Benedict retrieved Cordelia's ring from his discarded jacket. "I'll keep this safe," he told Lyra, "until the day you're ready for me to offer it properly." Lyra traced the emerald with a gentle finger, the stone catching the dim light. "My mother always said it brought good fortune to true love," she said softly, "that as long as it remained in our family, love would prevail over circumstance." Beautiful sentiment," Benedict replied, his voice thoughtful. "And fitting, I think." He placed the ring in the small wooden box Lyra kept on her nightstand, among her few treasures. The gesture, respectful, patient, understanding, touched her deeply. "The doctors said Cordelia's recovering more quickly than expected," Benedict observed, changing the subject as if sensing Lyra's emotional overload. "Dr. Montgomery is particularly optimistic. I noticed him visiting outside of his rounds," Lyra said, grateful for the shift in conversation. "He seems to have taken a special interest in her case." Benedict smiled mysteriously. "Atticus has always had excellent taste." "What do you mean?" Lyra asked, curious. "I believe he finds your grandmother quite fascinating," Benedict replied with amusement. "He mentioned her extraordinary spirit at least 3 times today." Lyra laughed, the sound bright in the quiet room. "Grandma would eat him alive." "Perhaps," Benedict agreed, "but I suspect he might enjoy the experience." As they drifted towards sleep, wrapped in each other's arms. Lyra felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, the differences in their backgrounds, the complications of blending their lives, they would face them together. Outside, the London rain continued to fall, washing the city clean for the morning to come. Inside the modest flat, Cordelia's emerald ring caught the occasional flash of lightning, its green fire a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Chapter 6. The Proposal. As spring turned to early summer, Cordelia's health steadily improved. Dr. Montgomery, Atticus, as he insisted Lyra and Cordelia call him, had become a regular visitor to their flat, ostensibly to monitor Cordelia's recovery, but increasingly lingering for tea and conversation. "He's quite taken with you," Lyra observed one afternoon after Atticus had departed, leaving behind a rare first edition of poetry he thought Cordelia might enjoy. "Nonsense," her grandmother replied, though her pleased expression betrayed her. "He's simply a conscientious physician." Benedict, witnessing this exchange from the small kitchen where he was preparing dinner, a surprisingly domestic skill he'd revealed recently, smiled knowingly at Lyra. Their silent communication had become effortless, a glance conveying what once required words. Later that evening, as they walked through Regent's Park in the golden light of sunset, Benedict seemed unusually thoughtful. "What's on your mind?" Lyra asked, her hand comfortably entwined with his. "I've been thinking about taking some time away," he replied. "From London, from work, perhaps somewhere beautiful and remote." Lyra felt a momentary pang of concern. "Alone?" Benedict squeezed her hand reassuringly. "With you, of course, if you can arrange time off from the publishing house." "Grandma Cordelia," Lyra began. "Would be well looked after," Benedict finished. "I believe Atticus would be more than willing to keep a close eye on her. In fact, I suspect he'd consider it a privilege rather than a duty." Lyra laughed, acknowledging the truth in his observation. "Where did you have in mind?" "Scotland," Benedict answered. "The Isle of Skye specifically. My family has a cottage there, nothing grand like Thornfield, just a simple stone house overlooking a loch. It's where I go when I need clarity." Something in his tone made Lyra's heart quicken. "And you need clarity now?" Benedict stopped walking, turning to face her. "No," he said softly. "For the first time in my life, I have perfect clarity. But I think you might benefit from some distance from London, from our daily lives, to gain your own." 2 weeks later, after ensuring Cordelia was comfortable with the arrangement, she had practically pushed them out the door, Atticus hovering solicitously nearby. They arrived on Skye as evening approached. The cottage, reached by a winding, single-track road, stood on a rocky promontory overlooking a steel-grey loch. "It's magnificent," Lyra breathed as they stepped from the Range Rover Benedict had hired in Inverness. The wind carried the scent of heather and salt, and distant mountains rose purple against the sky. "It's been in my family for over 200 years, Benedict explained as he unlocked the weathered oak door. "Originally a shepherd's cottage, though it's been expanded and modernized over time." Inside, the cottage was an unexpected blend of rustic charm and subtle luxury. Thick stone walls and exposed beams complemented by comfortable furniture and modern amenities. A massive fireplace dominated the main living area, already laid with logs. Benedict moved around the space with practiced ease, lighting the fire and opening a bottle of wine while Lyra explored. Despite its modest size compared to Thornfield Manor, the cottage felt equally authentic to Benedict's character, perhaps even more so. Here, away from social expectations and family history, she sensed a different side of him emerging. "How long has it been since you visited?" she asked, accepting a glass of rich red wine. Almost 3 years, he admitted, not since before my illness. They hadn't discussed his condition often since her discovery at Thornfield. Lyra knew the subject remained painful for him, a reminder of both physical vulnerability and personal rejection. "Why now?" she asked gently. Benedict's expression grew thoughtful as he gazed into the growing flames. "This place has always represented beginnings for me," he explained. "My father first brought me here when I was 10, after my mother died. We spent a month fishing, hiking, simply being together away from condolences and expectations. It was here that I began to heal." He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I wanted to share it with you because this is the most honest version of myself. No ancestral portraits watching, no family reputation to uphold, just me as I am." The simplicity of his statement touched Lyra deeply. Setting aside her glass, she crossed to where he stood and rose on tiptoes to kiss him, a kiss of understanding and acceptance that quickly deepened into something more urgent. Benedict responded immediately, his arms encircling her waist to lift her closer. The journey had kept them apart for many hours, and the emotional significance of the cottage seemed to intensify their need for connection. As the fire crackled beside them, illuminating their entwined figures, clothing was swiftly discarded. "I've been wanting you since we left London," Benedict murmured against her neck, his hands tracing the curves of her body with reverent hunger. Lyra laughed softly, the sound transforming into a gasp as his mouth found the sensitive spot beneath her ear. The driver might have objected to any earlier demonstration of that fact. In response, Benedict lifted her into his arms and carried her to the plush rug before the fireplace. Laying her down with deliberate gentleness, he knelt between her thighs, his gaze traveling over her body with undisguised appreciation. "You are the most beautiful thing that has ever been in this cottage," he said softly. Their lovemaking was unhurried, a careful exploration that built slowly toward release. When they finally lay spent in each other's arms, the fire burning low beside them, Lyra felt a sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with physical location. Over the next 5 days, they fell into a gentle rhythm, mornings spent hiking, the dramatic landscape, afternoons exploring ancient ruins or tiny fishing villages, evenings devoted to conversation and love. Each day, Lyra watched Benedict relax further, revealing sides of himself she hadn't glimpsed in London. On their 6th evening, as misty twilight descended over the loch, Benedict suggested a walk to a nearby stone circle that dated from Neolithic times. "It's particularly beautiful at sunset," he explained, as they followed a narrow path through blooming heather. "The stones catch the last light in a way that seems almost deliberate." When they reached the circle, 7 massive stones arranged with mathematical precision, the sky was painted in shades of amber and rose. Benedict led Lyra to the center, where a flat altar stone lay partially covered with moss. "These were sacred places," he told her, his voice low as if respecting ancient rituals. "Sites of ceremony, celebration, connection to forces greater than human understanding." Lyra touched one of the standing stones, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingers and imagining the hands that had shaped it thousands of years earlier. "It's humbling," she agreed, "to think of how briefly we exist in comparison." Benedict took her hand, drawing her attention back to him. In the fading light, his expression was both nervous and determined, a combination she had never seen on his usually confident face. "Perhaps that's why love matters so much," he said, his voice slightly unsteady. "Because in our brief existence, finding someone who truly sees us, accepts us, chooses us despite our flaws, it's the closest thing to eternity we can experience." As he spoke, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Lyra's Breath caught as he opened it to reveal Cordelia's emerald ring, now polished and set in a new platinum band that enhanced its beauty without diminishing its history. "I've had it resized," he explained softly, "but otherwise untouched. Your family's legacy preserved." Dropping to one knee on the ancient stone, he looked up at her with naked vulnerability. "Lyra Thornberry, you found me when I was dying. Not just physically that day in the bookshop, but spiritually, emotionally. You saved me with your honesty, your courage, your refusal to let circumstances dictate who you love." He took a breath, seeming to gather courage. "I know we come from different worlds. I know there will be challenges, but I also know that nothing in my life has ever felt as right as loving you." His voice dropped to an almost whisper. "Will you marry me? Will you create a new legacy with me, one based on love rather than bloodlines or social expectations?" The setting sun broke briefly through the mist, casting golden light across the stone circle. In that moment of illumination, Lyra saw not just the man before her, but the journey that had brought them together, the chance encounter, the mutual recognition, the obstacles overcome, and those still to face. She thought of Cordelia's words about her parents, about love transcending circumstance. She thought of the connection she and Benedict had formed, defying explanation or expectation. Mostly, she thought of how completely he had revealed himself to her, his vulnerabilities alongside his strengths, his fears alongside his hopes. "Yes," she said simply, her voice clear in the ancient sacred space. "Yes, I will marry you." Benedict's face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Rising, he gathered her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the ground, his lips finding hers in a kiss that sealed their commitment. That night, in the cottage's large four-poster bed, they made love with a new awareness of their shared future. Each caress seemed to hold deeper meaning, each whispered endearment a promise that extended beyond the moment. As moonlight spilled through the window, painting their entwined bodies in silver, Benedict traced the curve of Lyra's hip. With reverent fingers, "There's something I haven't told you," he said quietly. "Something medical." Lyra propped herself on one elbow, concerned by his serious tone. "What is it?" "Atticus has been consulting with specialists about my condition," Benedict explained. "There are new treatments being developed, experimental still, but showing promise. He believes there might be a chance, a small one, that the damage isn't as permanent as originally thought." Hope and caution warred in his voice, and Lyra understood immediately the magnitude of what he was sharing, not just medical information, but the vulnerable dream he had nearly abandoned. "You mean you might be able to—" She couldn't finish the sentence, afraid of igniting false hope. "Father children," he completed gently. "It's far from certain. The treatments are cutting edge, with limited success rates, but Atticus thinks I'm a good candidate." Lyra placed her palm against his cheek, meeting his gaze directly. "Benedict, I said yes, knowing children might never be possible for us. That hasn't changed." "I know," he assured her, "and I'm not telling you this to pressure you or create expectations. I'm telling you because I want our marriage to begin with complete honesty. No secrets, no unspoken hopes or fears between us." The gesture, his refusal to shield her from uncertainty or himself from potential disappointment, touched Lyra deeply. Lowering her lips to his, she poured all her love into a kiss that soon rekindled their passion. As their bodies joined again, moving together with practiced familiarity yet perpetual discovery, Lyra whispered against his shoulder, "Whatever happens, it's enough. You are enough." In the heart of ancient Scotland, surrounded by landscapes that had witnessed centuries of human joy and sorrow, they found sanctuary in each other, past and future, merging in the eternal present of their love. Chapter 7. Against All Odds. Sterile. London autumn painted Hyde Park in shades of copper and gold, as Lyra and Benedict strolled hand in hand beneath a canopy of falling leaves. 3 months had passed since their engagement in Scotland, months filled with quiet happiness and preparations for their December wedding. "Cordelia has invited Atticus to Sunday lunch again," Lyra remarked, amusement coloring her voice. "That makes the 4th time this month." Benedict chuckled, the sound warm in the crisp October air. "I think we may need to consider a double wedding at this rate." Their laughter faded as Benedict suddenly stopped walking, his free hand rising to his temple. Lyra turned to him, concern, immediately replacing her smile. "Benedict, what is it?" "Just a headache," he assured her, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. "I've been getting them occasionally. Nothing serious." Lyra studied his face, noting the pallor beneath his usual healthy complexion. "This isn't the first time, is it? And don't try to protect me from the truth." "No," he admitted reluctantly. "They started about 2 weeks ago, along with some other symptoms." Alarm flashed through Lyra. "What symptoms? Why haven't you said anything?" Benedict guided her to a nearby bench, his expression carefully controlled. "I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily. Atticus believes they're side effects from the treatment protocol." "Benedict," Lyra said firmly, "tell me everything, now." He sighed, recognizing the determination in her tone. "Fatigue, occasional dizziness, and some discomfort in the abdominal region." His hand unconsciously moved to the area of his old surgical scar. "All expected reactions to the stem cell therapy and hormone regulation, according to Atticus." "And you didn't think I should know this?" Lyra's voice softened with concern rather than accusation. Benedict captured her hand between both of his. "The protocol has been producing promising results. I didn't want to burden you with the temporary discomfort when the potential outcome means so much to both of us." Lyra's fingers tightened around his, fear and love warring within her. They had found each other against impossible odds. Surely fate wouldn't be cruel enough to threaten their happiness now. "We're partners," she reminded him gently. "Your burdens are mine to share." Benedict's monthly appointment with Atticus turned into a comprehensive examination, followed by blood tests and scans that left him feeling like a medical curiosity. Lyra insisted on accompanying him despite his protests, her presence both comfort and motivation to maintain a brave facade. They waited for Atticus in his private office. Lyra opened her sketchbook, pencil moving with practiced ease across the paper. Since their return from Scotland, she had found herself drawn back to art with renewed passion, filling sketchbooks with impressions and emotions that words couldn't express. Benedict watched her work, fascinated by the emergence of his own likeness. On the page, not a simple portrait but a study in hope and uncertainty, capturing his emotional state with uncanny precision. "How do you see so clearly?" he asked softly. Lyra glanced up, her pencil pausing. "I don't just look with my eyes," she explained. "I've always been able to see what people feel." She turned the sketchbook toward him more fully. "This is how you look when you think no one is watching, caught between hope and fear." The door opened before Benedict could respond, Atticus entering with a thick folder and an expression Benedict found impossible to read. "Sorry to keep you waiting," the physician said, settling behind his desk. "I wanted to consult with Dr. Chen at Johns Hopkins before our meeting." "Well?" Benedict asked, his patience exhausted. "What's the verdict?" Atticus looked up, his professional demeanor giving way to visible astonishment. "The results are remarkable, Benedict. Your hormone levels show significant normalization, and the ultrasound reveals actual tissue regeneration in previously damaged areas. Meaning? Lyra pressed, her hand finding Benedict's. Meaning, Atticus continued carefully, that the experimental protocol is working far better than we anticipated. The combination of targeted stem cell therapy and hormonal regulation appears to be reversing damage we believed permanent. The silence that followed was absolute. Benedict stared at his friend, unwilling to process the implications. "How certain are you?" he finally asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "The indicators are extremely positive," Atticus replied, opening the folder to show charts and images neither Benedict nor Lyra could interpret, but whose significance was clear from Atticus's expression. "I would estimate a 60 to 70% chance of full reproductive function returning within 6 to 12 months, based on the current rate of cellular regeneration." "And the headaches? The pain?" Lyra asked. "Side effects of the rapid hormonal changes," Atticus explained. "They should subside as his body adjusts to the new equilibrium. We can manage them with medication in the meantime." Benedict finally turned to Lyra, finding her eyes bright with unshed tears. "This doesn't change anything about us," he said softly. "I need you to know that." "I know," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "But it changes something for you, doesn't it? A possibility you'd surrendered." The drive back to Benedict's townhouse passed in contemplative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Upon arriving home, Benedict excused himself to make several calls, his composed businessman persona firmly in place despite the emotional upheaval within. Left alone, Lyra wandered to the sunroom where she had set up a small studio space at Benedict's insistence. An easel stood by the windows, afternoon light illuminating the canvas she had begun working on several weeks earlier, her first serious painting since abandoning art school. The piece was abstract, yet evocative, swirls of blue and gold merging and separating across the canvas, suggesting two distinct energies finding harmony. She had started it after their engagement, unable to express through words the profound connection she felt with Benedict. Now, picking up a brush and squeezing fresh paint onto her palette, she added new elements, small flecks of crimson energy, emerging from the meeting point of blue and gold, suggesting possibilities yet to be realized. Hours passed as she worked, channeling her emotional turmoil into creation. She didn't hear Benedict enter until his hands gently came to rest on her shoulders. "It's beautiful," he murmured, studying the evolved painting. "What does it represent?" Lyra set down her brush, suddenly self-conscious. "Us," she admitted. "The blue is you, the gold is me, and now these new elements emerging between us." Benedict's arms encircled her waist, drawing her back against his chest. "Hope," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "You've painted hope." Turning in his embrace, Lyra found his expression unguarded for the first time since receiving Atticus's news. Vulnerability and fear mingled with tentative joy. "I don't know how to feel," he confessed, the careful composure finally cracking. "For 5 years, I've accepted this limitation, built my life around it. I nearly didn't pursue you because of it." Lyra watched him, allowing him the space to process. "And now?" "Now I'm afraid to hope," he admitted, moving away to pace before the windows. "Afraid that if I allow myself to believe this, to imagine a future with children of our own, it will be taken away again. I couldn't bear another loss like that." Lyra rose and crossed to him, her hands gentle as they framed his face. "Whatever happens, Benedict, we face it together," she promised. "If this miracle comes to pass, we'll embrace it gratefully. If not, we'll have a beautiful life regardless." The simple wisdom of her words penetrated the chaos of his emotions. Bending his head, Benedict captured her lips in a kiss that quickly deepened from gratitude to desire. Their connection had always been intensely physical from the first touch, as if their bodies recognized each other even when their minds harbored doubts. Now, with new possibility humming between them, their need for connection grew urgent. Benedict lifted Lyra onto his desk, papers scattering unheeded as he pressed between her thighs, his mouth never leaving hers. Clothes were hastily removed, caution abandoned in favor of immediate gratification. When he finally entered her, Benedict felt a new awareness, a consciousness of what their joining might now create. The thought sent unprecedented intensity through him as they moved together, their passion both an affirmation of their bond and an expression of newfound hope. 3 days later, as Lyra arranged autumn flowers in the drawing room, the doorbell rang. Harrison, who had accompanied Benedict from Thornfield to serve in the London house, announced a visitor. "Lady Imogen Whitley, madam." Lyra stiffened, turning to face her nemesis with as much composure as she could muster. Imogen stood in the doorway, elegant as always in a tailored navy suit, her expression carefully neutral. "Miss Thornbury," she greeted formally, "or should I say, the future Mrs. Fairchild." "Lady Whitley," Lyra acknowledged. "Benedict isn't home at present." "I'm aware," Imogen replied, stepping further into the room. "I timed my visit deliberately to speak with you privately." Alarm bells rang in Lyra's mind, but she maintained outward calm. "Please, sit down. Would you like tea?" Imogen declined the seat, but accepted the tea, taking the cup with practiced grace. "My brother Edward telephoned me yesterday," she said without preamble. He'd heard from the family solicitors that Benedict has been undergoing some experimental medical treatment. Lyra kept her expression carefully neutral. "I don't believe Benedict's medical matters are appropriate topics for gossip." A hint of the old sharpness flashed in Imogen's eyes, quickly suppressed. "No, they're not. But they are matters of significant interest to our branch of the family, as I'm sure you understand." She set down her teacup precisely. "Edward's son has been raised to expect the Fairchild inheritance, and now that expectation may be premature," Lyra concluded, understanding dawning. Imogen didn't deny it. "I came to assess the situation for myself." "You mean to assess me?" Lyra corrected gently, "to determine if I might be convinced to discourage Benedict from continuing his treatments." Surprise flickered across Imogen's face. "You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for. And you're more transparent than you believe," Lyra countered without rancor. "But you've wasted your journey. Benedict's medical decisions are his own, and I support whatever choice brings him peace." Imogen studied her for a long moment. "You truly love him," she said finally, something like reluctant respect in her voice. "Not his position or fortune, but him." "I do," Lyra confirmed simply. A strange expression crossed Imogen's face, almost wistful. "I envy that," she admitted, unexpectedly. "My own marriage was a business arrangement that failed spectacularly." The vulnerability in this admission surprised Lyra, revealing dimensions to Imogen she hadn't glimpsed before. "Perhaps there's room for multiple forms of legacy," Lyra suggested carefully. "Thornfield and its entailments are only one type of inheritance." Imogen's laugh held little humor. "You sound like Benedict's mother. She used to say much the same thing." She gathered her gloves, preparing to leave. "I won't pretend to wish you happiness, Miss Thornbury. But I do wish you honesty. In your marriage, it's worth more than titles or estates." As Harrison showed Imogen out, Lyra returned to her flower arrangement, mind swirling with this unexpected interaction. She had glimpsed, however briefly, the woman beneath the polished aristocratic facade, someone who had made choices according to family expectations rather than personal desires. and found emptiness as a result. Later that evening, as she related the strange visit to Benedict, she was surprised by his thoughtful reaction. Imogen wasn't always so cold, he reflected, swirling brandy in his glass as they sat before the fire. As children, we were actually quite close. She was brilliant, passionate about history and architecture. Then she was matched with Lord Whitley when she was barely 20, and everything changed. What happened? Lyra asked. He was 3 decades her senior, brutal in his expectations and unfaithful from the beginning, Benedict said grimly. The divorce nearly destroyed her family financially and socially. Since then, she's been obsessed with security, and Thornfield represents the ultimate security in her mind. Understanding dawned in Lyra's eyes. So her hostility toward me was never truly about you, Benedict confirmed, but about what you represented. Another threat to what she perceives as her family's lifeline. This insight gave Lyra a new perspective on their antagonist, transforming her from villain to complex human whose circumstances had narrowed her choices and hardened her heart. Perhaps someday we can reach an understanding with her, Lyra suggested. Not friendship, but peace. Benedict smiled, once again amazed by his fiancée's capacity for compassion. Your ability to see the best in people is one of the many reasons I love you, he said, setting aside his glass to pull her into his arms. As they made love that night, slowly and tenderly, in contrast to their earlier passionate encounter, Benedict whispered promises against Lyra's skin, of love unconditional, of partnership absolute, of a future shared regardless of what medical miracles might or might not come to pass. Later, as Lyra drifted towards sleep in his arms, Benedict remained awake, watching moonlight paint silver patterns across their entwined bodies. For the first time since receiving Atticus's news, he allowed himself to truly hope, not just for restored fertility, but for the family he had once believed forever beyond his reach. Chapter 8. Winter's Magic. Snow fell in gentle flurries outside. St. Margaret's Abbey on December 21st, the winter solstice, a day of emerging light from darkness that Benedict had chosen with deliberate symbolism. Inside, centuries-old stone walls glowed with the warmth of hundreds of candles, illuminating the intimate gathering of family and close friends. Before the ceremony, Atticus visited Benedict in a small antechamber where he adjusted his formal attire with nervous precision. Your latest results came in this morning, Atticus said, handing him a sealed envelope. I thought you might want to know today. Benedict's hands stilled on his tie. Tell me. Continued improvement, Atticus confirmed. The tissue regeneration is progressing even more rapidly than we projected. He smiled at his friend. Consider it a wedding gift from medical science. Benedict absorbed this news with quiet gratitude as he completed his preparations. When he took his place at the altar minutes later, his composure was perfect, except for the slight tremor in his hands, the invincible man vulnerable on this most important day. When the music changed and Lyra appeared at the entrance, Benedict felt his breath catch. She wore an elegantly simple ivory gown that emphasized her graceful figure, carrying winter roses and holly berries. Her artistic sensibility had influenced every element of the ceremony, from the balanced composition of flowers to the precise placement of candles that created a golden path toward the altar. As she walked toward him on Atticus's arm, a role he had accepted with misty-eyed honor when asked, Benedict saw not just her physical beauty, but the journey that had brought them here, from a chance medical emergency to this deliberate, chosen union. In the front pew, Cordelia watched with undisguised joy, resplendent in royal blue silk, her recovery evident in her bright eyes and straight posture. Beside her sat Atticus's empty place, the two having grown inseparable in recent months, their shared medical backgrounds forming an unexpected foundation for deep companionship. When Lyra reached him, Benedict took her hands and spoke the words they had written together. "I come to you not as a man who has everything, but as one who found his greatest treasure in the most unexpected place. You saw me at my weakest and gave me strength. You faced my darkest truth and offered light. I vow to honor the miracle of finding you with every day we share." Lyra's eyes glistened as she responded, her clear voice carrying through the hushed abbey. "I promise to walk beside you through whatever life brings, to create beauty from challenge, to find strength in vulnerability, and to remember always that love is the greatest artwork we will ever create together. What began as chance, I now claim as choice to be your partner, your equal, your home." As they exchanged rings, his grandmother's diamond joining Cordelia's emerald on Lyra's finger, the abbey bells began to toll, marking the exact moment of solstice. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the vicar declared. "What God has joined together, let no one put asunder." Their first kiss as a married couple conveyed more than words ever could. A promise, a commitment, a beginning. The reception at Thornfield Manor transformed the austere Great Hall into a winter wonderland. From her seat beside Benedict at the head table, Lyra observed the gathering with an artist's eye, the composition of guests, the play of light on crystal, the contrast of ancient oak against fresh flowers. "You've made some changes to the family." "A gallery," she noted quietly to Benedict, having spotted the difference during their arrival. He smiled, pleased she had noticed. "I had my mother's self-portrait brought down from storage and hung in the central position. The first of many changes, I hope." Lyra understood the significance. A quiet revolution against centuries of tradition that valued only male contributions to the Fairchild legacy. Benedict's hand found hers beneath the table. "One day, your work will hang there too." The declaration, so certain, so accepting of her artistic identity, touched her deeply. Before she could respond, they were called for their first dance. As they moved together across the floor, Lyra was acutely aware of significant absences. Lady Imogen Whitley had received but not acknowledged her invitation. A peace offering Benedict had extended despite Lyra's reservations. Her absence spoke volumes about unresolved tensions that still simmered beneath the surface of family politics. "Are you disappointed she didn't come?" Lyra asked softly. Benedict's arms tightened slightly around her waist. "The only opinion that matters to me is yours," he said simply. "And perhaps Cordelia's," he added with a smile, nodding toward where his new grandmother-in-law was deep in animated conversation with Atticus. "I believe we're about to be usurped as the romantic focus of the family," Lyra observed with amusement. Their honeymoon journey began that evening with a chartered flight to Paris, the first stop in a carefully planned European tour. Their suite at the Ritz overlooked twinkling city lights. Champagne chilled in silver and rose petals adorned the turned-down bed. "Mrs. Fairchild," Benedict whispered, slowly unfastening the buttons of her silk blouse while maintaining eye contact that quickened her breath. Lyra's fingers were equally busy with his clothing. "I've been imagining this moment since we said goodbye last night." Their lovemaking took on new significance. No longer lovers, but husband and wife, bound by vows and promises publicly declared. The intensity of their connection had only deepened. With each challenge overcome, each barrier dismantled between them. From Paris, they traveled to a chateau in the snow-covered French Alps, then to Venice and Florence. Lyra experienced these iconic cities through dual perspectives. Her artistic training that recognized brushstrokes in Botticelli's masterpieces and techniques in Venetian glass alongside her emotional response to beauty shared with the man she loved. In Florence's Uffizi gallery, Benedict watched her studying a particular Renaissance painting with intense concentration, her expression revealing professional assessment rather than tourist appreciation. "You see things differently," he observed. "Technical elements I would never notice. It's how I was trained," she explained, pointing to brush techniques invisible to untrained eyes, to deconstruct beauty into its components while still appreciating the whole. "Like you do with people," Benedict suggested, "seeing layers beneath the surface." Lyra considered this thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's why I recognized something in you that first day, beneath the medical emergency. Some essential quality that felt..." She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Familiar," Benedict supplied, "as if we'd known each other before." By the time they reached their final destination, a private villa on the Amalfi coast, they had settled into the rhythm of married life while maintaining the passionate connection that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. On their final evening, Benedict arranged a surprise, their bedroom transformed with candles, flowers, and the scent of jasmine heavy in the air. "You're doing?" Lyra asked, turning to him with a smile. "I wanted something special for our last night," he admitted, guiding her toward the waiting bed. Their lovemaking was unhurried, a leisurely exploration rather than urgent passion. Benedict took his time worshipping every inch of Lyra's body, drawing gasps and sighs with knowing touches, his mouth and hands skilled from learning her most sensitive places. When he finally entered her, the familiar connection felt somehow new, deeper, more significant. As they moved together toward release, Lyra gazed up at her husband, suddenly overwhelmed by emotion that transcended physical pleasure. "I don't want this to end," she whispered. "Not just tonight, but this time together, away from everything." "Nothing is ending," Benedict promised, his rhythm steady and deliberate. "Everything is just beginning." As they reached completion together, Lyra felt unexpectedly emotional, a profound sense of rightness and completion that brought tears to her eyes. Later, as Benedict slept beside her, Lyra gazed out at the Mediterranean moonlight painting, silver patterns across their terrace. She felt different somehow, though she couldn't articulate exactly how. Something fundamental had shifted within her, beyond the change in marital status or the culmination of their journey. Placing a hand on her flat stomach, she wondered if their story was already expanding in ways they hadn't yet recognized. The moon cast silver light across their bed as Lyra drifted towards sleep, a sense of peaceful anticipation settling over her like a blessing. Chapter 9. Whispers of Miracle. February brought relentless rain to London, turning the city into a watercolor, painting of blurred lights and reflective pavements. In the master bathroom of their Kensington townhouse, a wedding gift from Benedict, Lyra stared at the small plastic stick in her trembling hand, hardly daring to believe the two pink lines that had appeared. 6 weeks had passed since their return from Italy. Subtle changes had accumulated gradually, sensitivity to certain smells, unusual fatigue, and finally, a missed cycle she had initially attributed to travel and adjustment to married life. For the past week, she had found herself sketching nursery layouts in her private journal without fully understanding her own impulse. The bathroom door opened slowly, revealing Benedict's concerned face. "Lyra, you've been in here for 20 minutes. Are you..." His words died as he registered what she was holding. For a moment that seemed to stretch eternally, they stared at each other in stunned silence. Then, with a choked sound that was half laugh, half sob, Lyra held out the test. "I think," she said, her voice unsteady, "that your body has been healing even more effectively than Atticus predicted." Benedict crossed the room in 2 strides, taking the test from her hand with reverence. "You're pregnant?" he whispered, the question unnecessary but essential to process the revelation. Lyra nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I need to see a doctor to confirm, but yes, I believe I am." For a man typically eloquent and composed, Benedict's reaction was beautifully unrestrained. A strangled cry escaped him as he dropped to his knees before Lyra, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "A child," he murmured against her skin, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." Lyra's hands cradled his head, her fingers threading through his hair as her own tears fell freely. "The miracle we didn't dare expect," she agreed softly. When Benedict finally looked up, his face was transformed with a joy so pure it made Lyra's heart ache. Rising to his feet, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to their bedroom, laying her gently on the crisp white duvet, as if she had suddenly become precious crystal. "Benedict," she laughed through her tears. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "You're carrying our child," he corrected, his eyes never leaving hers as he stretched out beside her. "The most precious thing in my universe." Their lovemaking that morning was unlike any they had shared before, tender, almost worshipful, with Benedict treating her body as a temple, housing the most sacred gift. When they lay entwined afterward, the rain pattering against the windows created a cocoon of peaceful isolation around them. "We should call Atticus," Lyra said eventually, her head resting on Benedict's chest. "He'll want to monitor the pregnancy closely, given the circumstances." Benedict nodded, his fingers drawing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "And Cordelia should be the first to know after him." "She'll be insufferably smug," Lyra predicted, with a smile. "She's been dropping hints about great-grandchildren since before the wedding." The following week found them in Atticus's private medical office, Lyra lying on an examination table, while a technician moved an ultrasound wand across her gel-covered abdomen. Benedict stood beside her, gripping her hand so tightly it almost hurt, both of them staring anxiously at the grainy, black-and-white screen. Atticus studied the images with professional detachment that didn't quite mask his personal investment in this particular case. "Everything looks excellent for approximately 7 weeks gestation," he assured them. "Perfectly positioned, strong heartbeat." He paused, frowning slightly as he moved the wand to a different angle. "That's interesting," he murmured. "What?" Benedict and Lyra asked simultaneously, tension immediately escalating. Instead of answering immediately, Atticus adjusted some settings on the machine, his focus intense. Then, with a smile breaking through his professional demeanor, he turned the screen toward them. "Do you see this?" he asked, pointing to a pulsing shape. "That's your baby's heartbeat." His finger moved slightly. "And this is your other baby's heartbeat." The silence that followed was absolute. Lyra stared at the screen, unable to process what she was seeing. "Twins," Benedict finally managed, his voice barely audible. "Fraternal twins," Atticus confirmed. 2 separate embryos, both appearing perfectly healthy at this stage. Lyra felt the room tilt slightly, Benedict's steady hand on her shoulder, the only anchor keeping her from floating away in shock. "But how?" she began, then stopped, the question absurd even as it formed. Atticus's expression was a mixture of scientific fascination and genuine delight. Looking at Benedict's latest test results and the timing of conception, it appears the regenerative protocol reached optimal effectiveness just as you returned from your honeymoon. The probability of twins, however, was not increased by the treatment that appears to be simply remarkable timing or perhaps genetic predisposition we weren't aware of. 2 children. Benedict whispered, his eyes fixed on the screen in wonder. 2 boys, if my initial assessment is correct, Atticus added, though it's still early to be certain. Later, in the privacy of their car, Lyra finally gave in to the laughter that had been building inside her, slightly hysterical but genuinely joyful. Twins, she repeated, the word simultaneously terrifying and wonderful. 2 babies, Benedict. He reached across to take her hand, his expression still dazed. Not just children, but a family in a single moment, he marveled. When the universe decides to correct an injustice, it apparently does so emphatically. That evening, over a special dinner at Cordelia's favorite restaurant, they shared the news with her. The elderly woman's reaction was everything they had anticipated. Initial shock followed by tearful joy that transformed quickly into practical planning. The 3rd bedroom in your townhouse should be the nursery, she declared, already rearranging their lives. It gets the morning sun, which is ideal for babies. And you'll need a proper night nurse at first. Twin infants are no small undertaking. Benedict listened with amused tolerance, but Lyra could see the emotion beneath his composed exterior, the profound gratitude that Cordelia would be present to see her great-grandchildren, to impart wisdom and family stories that would have otherwise been lost. Atticus, who had joined them for the celebration, watched Cordelia with unmistakable admiration. Their relationship had evolved in recent months, from medical consultations to theater outings, and now regular Sunday teas. Without being obvious, he positioned himself beside her throughout the evening, his attention never straying far. "You've made an unexpected conquest," Benedict murmured to Lyra as they observed the pair deep in conversation about the proper age to introduce children to Shakespeare. "Not unexpected at all," Lyra countered. "2 intelligent, passionate people who value knowledge and have experienced life's challenges. It makes perfect sense." The following morning brought an unexpected delivery, a small, exquisitely wrapped package addressed to Lyra. Inside lay a delicate silver locket containing a miniature reproduction of the Fairchild family crest, accompanied by a note in elegant script: "Traditions evolve, bloodlines continue. May your children honor both their heritage and their remarkable mother. Lady Imogen Whitley." Benedict read the note over Lyra's shoulder, his expression complex. "An olive branch," he observed. "One I never expected." "Should I accept it?" Lyra asked, uncertain. "The choice is yours," Benedict replied, "but I believe people can change when given reason to." After consideration, Lyra penned a simple response: "Thank you for your kindness. The children will know all branches of their family tree. Lyra." That night, as they prepared for bed, Benedict came up behind Lyra at her vanity table, his hands gently cupping the almost imperceptible swell of her abdomen. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. Lyra met his eyes in the mirror. "For what?" "For saving my life that day in the bookshop," he answered simply. "For giving me a reason to live. For carrying our children." His voice broke slightly on the final word. "For everything." Turning in his arms, Lyra rose to kiss him deeply, pouring all her love and hope into the connection. The kiss quickly kindled familiar desire, heightened by the knowledge of the new lives growing within her. Their passion, temporarily restrained by earlier shock and medical concerns, resurged with renewed intensity. Benedict lifted Lyra onto the vanity, scattering perfume bottles and makeup brushes with careless abandon as his hands moved beneath her silk nightgown. "Is this safe?" he murmured against her throat, even as his fingers traced paths that made her gasp. "The babies." Atticus said normal activity is fine, Lyra assured him, her own hands busy with the drawstring of his pajama bottoms. Essential even, for my well-being. When they came together, the physical pleasure was amplified by the emotional significance of their connection, the tangible evidence of their love now growing within Lyra, defying medical certainty and statistical probability. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Benedict's hand rested protectively over her stomach. "What shall we name them?" he asked softly. "Our miracle twins." Lyra smiled in the darkness. "For two boys, I've always loved the name Sebastian, perhaps paired with Oliver after your grandfather?" Sebastian and Oliver Fairchild. Benedict tested the combination. Distinguished, strong, perfect together. They drifted to sleep discussing middle names and godparents, Benedict's arm protectively around Lyra, their hands joined over the tiny lives they had created against impossible odds. Chapter 10. Love's Greatest Gift. Spring transformed London by mid-April, just as Lyra's pregnancy reached the 34th week. Her slender frame had adapted remarkably to accommodate the growing twins, though Dr. Montgomery had recently prescribed reduced activity due to her elevated blood pressure, a common complication with multiple pregnancies. The nursery at their Kensington townhouse had been completed under Cordelia's expert guidance. Walls painted a soothing sage green with hand-drawn woodland creatures Lyra had sketched, and Benedict had insisted on having professionally transferred to the walls. Twin oak cribs stood positioned near windows, overlooking their private garden, each with identical mobiles crafted from wooden stars that caught the morning light. "You've incorporated elements from both our families beautifully," Benedict observed, as they reviewed the completed room. "The Fairchild oak furniture with your artistic vision." Lyra rested a hand on her prominent abdomen as one of the twins executed what felt like gymnastics. "They're running out of room," she noted with a tired smile. "Atticus says they're developing perfectly, but I suspect they'll arrive before the 38th week target." "Impatient, like their father," Benedict replied, placing his hand beside hers to feel the strong movements. The peaceful moment ended abruptly when Lyra gasped, clutching the doorframe as a sharp pain radiated across her lower back. "What is it?" Benedict asked, instantly alert. "Just the Braxton Hicks contractions Atticus mentioned," Lyra assured him, though her expression remained strained. "They've been increasing this week." Benedict guided her to their bedroom, insisting she rest while he contacted Atticus. The physician arrived within the hour, his examination thorough, and his expression increasingly concerned. "Your blood pressure has reached a concerning level," he informed them directly. "The protein levels in your urine indicate preeclampsia is progressing despite our preventative measures." "What does that mean for Lyra and the babies?" Benedict asked, maintaining composure, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the bedpost. "It means hospital admission today," Atticus replied, firmly. "If we can't stabilize your condition within 24 hours, we'll need to deliver the twins immediately." Seeing their alarm, he added, "They've reached excellent development at 34 weeks. Their prognosis would be very good." Within 2 hours, Lyra was settled in a private suite at London's most prestigious maternity hospital. Benedict arranged for his work to be handled remotely, refusing to leave her side except for brief, necessary absences. During one such absence the following morning, Lyra received an unexpected visitor. Lady Imogen Whitley appeared in the doorway, carrying a modest arrangement of spring flowers. "May I come in?" she asked with uncharacteristic hesitation. Lyra nodded, curious about this development. Since the silver locket gift, there had been no further communication from Benedict's cousin. "I heard about your hospitalization through family channels," Imogen explained, placing the flowers on a side table. I thought, well, I've experienced this particular complication myself. You have children? Lyra asked, genuinely surprised. A shadow crossed Imogen's face. A daughter, briefly. She arrived too early during my marriage to Lord Whitley. The medical care then wasn't what it is now. She visibly composed herself. But you're in excellent hands with Atticus Montgomery. He's the finest specialist in London. Before Lyra could respond to this unexpected vulnerability, Imogen continued with practical directness. Pre-eclampsia can turn serious quickly. Don't allow Benedict's optimism to delay necessary intervention. Men can be sentimental about these matters, but your safety must come first. The concern in her voice, genuine despite her formal delivery, touched Lyra deeply. Thank you, she said simply, for the advice and for coming. Imogen nodded once, her composure firmly back in place. The Fairchild men need strong women to balance their dramatic tendencies. It appears you're more than equal to the task. With a final glance at Lyra's monitor readings, she added, I'll have my secretary send contact information for the best pediatric specialists, just as a precaution. After she departed, Lyra reflected on this revelation, the hidden trauma that explained much about Imogen's brittle exterior and obsession with family security. The insight transformed her from antagonist to complex human, whose circumstances had narrowed her choices and hardened her heart. When Benedict returned and Lyra related the visit, his expression revealed surprise, followed by understanding. I never knew, he said quietly, about her child. It explains so much. Throughout that day, Lyra's condition deteriorated despite medical intervention. Her blood pressure continued rising and persistent headaches signaled advancing preeclampsia. By evening, Atticus gathered the medical team for consultation. We need to perform a cesarean immediately, he informed Benedict and Lyra. The risks of waiting now outweigh any benefits of further fetal development. Benedict maintained outward calm as the medical team prepared Lyra for surgery, but she saw the fear beneath his composed exterior. As they wheeled her toward the operating theater, she gripped his hand with surprising strength. Stay with me, she whispered. Always, he promised, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. Through this and everything to come, the procedure commenced with clinical efficiency, Benedict seated beside Lyra's head, while Atticus worked with quiet competence behind the surgical drape. After what seemed simultaneously moments and eternity, a high, indignant wail pierced the clinical atmosphere. Baby A is a boy, Atticus announced. Excellent size for 34 weeks, strong lungs. Sebastian, Lyra whispered, her eyes meeting Benedict's through a haze of medication and emotion. Sebastian Ellington Fairchild. Seconds later, a second cry joined his brother's, equally robust though slightly softer. Baby B is also a boy, Atticus confirmed, slightly smaller but equally well developed. Oliver, Benedict said, his voice thick with emotion. Oliver Atticus Fairchild. Atticus looked up momentarily, surprise giving way to evident pleasure at the name choice before he returned his attention to completing the procedure. Both infants are showing remarkably good development for 34 weeks. The pediatric specialist confirmed after thorough assessment. No respiratory issues, excellent reflexes, good color. They'll need standard monitoring, but I anticipate no significant complications. The relief on Benedict's face was profound as he conveyed this news to Lyra, whose consciousness had begun to drift from medication and exhaustion. They're healthy, he assured her, pressing his lips to her forehead. Both of them. Perfect little miracles. Once Lyra was stabilized in recovery, the nurses brought the swaddled twins for their first